Hello, grade 10s, and welcome to our first formal lesson on the topic of weather. We're going to take a look at what causes the weather, how we can predict it, what are the types of weather, and all that interesting stuff that we talk about every day. So what is the weather? When I say weather, what I'm talking about is what's going on in the atmosphere at any given time. Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? Is it windy? Is it snowing? That's weather. It's the day-to-day type of things that we see. When we talk about climate, we're talking about the average weather over a period of time. We could talk about the fact that Canada is a reasonably temperate climate. That doesn't mean that we don't have warm weather on some days and ridiculously cold weather on others. Of course we do. But we can talk about our overall averages when we talk about climate. And you'll hear a lot of people mix the two terms up, especially in the media. You'll often hear people say that there's no climate change on days that feel very cold, but what they're really talking about is weather. So I want us to make sure that we understand the difference. Weather is day to day. Climate talks about the average weather over a long period of time. Now, when we talk about predicting the weather, what we're talking about is the study of meteorology. It's kind of a funny sounding term. It almost sounds like you're studying meteors. But meteorologists actually take a look at what's happening in the atmosphere over several days, and they use the information that they gather to predict what will be coming for you at any given day. So you know whether or not you can plan that barbecue on the weekend or whether you want to move it to a different day. Now, in the past, we didn't have meteorologists. We had old wives' tales. In fact, at one point, people thought weather was caused by the gods, and so if you pleased them, they would do good things for you, and if you annoyed them, then they would give you bad weather. Before today's video, I had you go and research some different weather wives' tales, and there are some really interesting ones out there. A lot of them rhyme to help people remember them. For example, when the ring is round the moon, it speaks of snow that's coming soon. And you would notice that before it snows, you do see a ring forming around the moon. It's a lovely little poem to remember, but it's actually based on some actual atmospheric conditions. If there's a lot of ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, they will cast a ring around the moon. Other different wives' tales, some of them work, some of them didn't. There's not a lot of accuracy as a generality, but some of them actually were based on different pieces of actual science. In order for us to predict what's going on with the weather now, however, we need to know what the components of the Earth are and how they interact to cause different kinds of weather to begin in the first place. So we like talking about the Earth in terms of three big layers. And those layers we call spheres. A sphere is just a fancy science name for a ball shape. So the hydrosphere is the water ball, the part of the Earth that's covered in water. We could talk about the lithosphere. Litho means rock, so this would be the solid parts of the Earth, and the atmosphere. Atmos meaning the gases, and this is the very thin layer of gases that surrounds our Earth. And that's where weather happens. But that weather doesn't happen without interactions with the hydrosphere and lithosphere as well. In all three layers, we will have life. And so the biosphere, which we talked about earlier in our ecology unit, lets us talk about all the different areas of living things. Now, the hydrosphere, like we said, was the water layer, and it's important for us to remember that the hydrosphere covers about 75% of our planet. That's 3/4 in terms of fraction. Most of the water on our planet is salt water, so it's not very good for us to drink, but there's vast majority of our planet is covered in water. Salt water would be oceans and seas, and the fresh water would be rivers, lakes, and glaciers. The lithosphere is the rock portions of our land. We've got continents, which are the biggest areas, and we have smaller areas of land called islands. We've got 7 major continents that affect how the weather is going to form and the way the winds are going to blow and how the heating is going to happen, and smaller areas called islands interspersed as well. And these both together influence how the weather is going to form. Finally, the atmosphere is where the weather actually forms. And the atmosphere is made up of a bunch of different gases, almost all of which, believe it or not, is nitrogen. 78%. Remember that number. It's almost 80% of the air that you breathe is nitrogen. So remember that next time someone offers you, you can have air for free in your tires or an 80% nitrogen mixture if I charge you, you should probably look right at them and shake your head. Only 21% of the air you breathe is actually oxygen. So it's not very much of our air is oxygen. If I was a spaceman looking down on the planet, I'd probably think nitrogen was the gas that the organisms were breathing. The remaining 1% is absolutely everything else. And the most weather impacting of that 1% is carbon dioxide. We're going to talk more about that later. So here's a quick little graphic that you have in your notes to talk about the composition of the atmosphere. Again, 78% of the air you breathe is nitrogen, 21% is oxygen, and the remaining 1% is the trace gases, including carbon dioxide. Now, the air, our atmosphere, even though it's a very thin layer that surrounds the Earth, is usually talked about in terms of different layers. I want you to remember the names of these layers and where they are in relation to the surface. So we're going to start at the bottom where we live. On the surface is where humans live. We call that the troposphere. That's where weather happens. You got to remember that weather happens where it affects us. So it happens in the troposphere. Immediately above the troposphere is the stratosphere. The stratosphere is where we have the ozone layer, and the ozone layer is that layer that protects us from the sun's UV radiation. There's lots of different kinds of radiation that comes from the sun. And ultraviolet is the kind that gives you a suntan, but could also cause skin cancer if you get too much of it. We're protected from most of it by a gas called ozone, and the chemical formula for that is O3. Above the stratosphere, we get into two top layers, the mesosphere and the thermosphere. And as we get up into those upper layers, we're getting up into the area where spacecraft first enter the Earth, and where we really want to remember and focus on our weather is in the troposphere and the stratosphere. Now, up in those upper layers, in that thermosphere, can be divided into two areas, one of which is the ionosphere. And the ionosphere is where we find the northern lights. So the picture on the left shows a beautiful photograph of how bright the northern lights can get in the sky, especially if you go further north. The picture on the right is actually a picture taken right outside of Brandon, Manitoba. And I'll include a link to a video that you can see to watch what they might look like. But if you watch in the northern sky, you'll quite often see the lights dancing in the sky, and these are caused by some of that radiation we were talking about just a moment ago, bouncing off the gases in the ionosphere. And that, as that bounces around up there, we get the different patterns of light forming, and they can really be quite beautiful. Now, in your notes, you have this blank little page that allows you to label the layers of the atmosphere. I want you to do this because we're going to do a quiz or a test on the layers of the atmosphere, and this is great practice for you. So see if you can label them on your own first, remembering from bottom to top, from the Earth up to space, which order they go in. And if you need to, go back a page and take a look at the label diagram that we previously gave you. Now, quite often people ask, why is the sky blue? And the most common incorrect answer that I get is, well, it's reflecting off the ocean. But that's not actually correct. The ocean's blue because it's reflecting off the sky. If you ever took a scoop of water out of the ocean and looked at it in a glass, it's colorless, it's clear. Water isn't blue, it just looks that way as it reflects the sky. Why is our sky blue? Well, it's blue because those are the light rays that get scattered as the sun's light shines through to the surface of the Earth. We can look at the sun, although we shouldn't look at it directly, during the daytime, and it has a yellow color. The yellowy color is the light that comes straight into our eyes. The blues and the greens get scattered by the atmosphere, and that is the color that we see as the remainder of the sky. At sunset, however, as the sun is on a sharper angle to us, and the light has to travel through a much thicker layer of air, those yellows and oranges will also scatter, and then the sky will take on a yellow-orange kind of a color and down into the reds as we approach nighttime. It's a cool little experiment you can do to see this for yourself. If you get a clear glass or a container, round works, but square works even better, and fill it with water and then add a couple of drops of milk to it, not very much. Then find a nice dark room and a flashlight of some variety. I found that I've had great results using the light that comes on the back of my cell phone. Experiment by looking at the color of the milk in the water if you shine your flashlight directly through it or on different angles. You'll notice that you can actually change the color of the water from being a pale blue color to an orangey yellow color by increasing the amount of, in air quotes, atmosphere that the light is shining through. I've included a link here to the description for the experiment, and I'll post it below the video. Before we go on to our next lesson to talk about how the sun is influencing our weather, I'd like you guys to review everything we've talked about today by completing task 1 in your weather workbook.